Good morning, everybody. Let me pull something up real quick before we get started. I'm really excited about being here this morning. Excited to see everybody on. Looks like Sherry and David and the Pennells and Jennifer are all on. If you're on, go ahead and leave a comment. Let us know that you are watching. And that way I can see. Oh, there's Karen. So good to see everybody this morning. There's Georgiana. I want to share basically, I'm going to share the message that I was going to preach last week, and then last week got postponed, and now it got pushed to this week. And this week, we're just gonna do it kind of an abbreviated. Hopefully, we'll see how well I can abbreviate version. Looks like Scott is here, and Janice, and Zach, and Yvette. So glad to see everybody this morning. I'm excited about this morning, not only for the message. I mean, I'm really excited about the message. In fact, that's one of the reasons why last week, as I was trying to figure out what to do, and I talked to the board, and looking at all the weather and the way that it was, I really was hoping that this morning's message could be, everybody could be there. But it is what it is, and I'm sure that God had his reasons. So I hate that we weren't able to be in person this morning, but after talking to everybody and hearing how some of the roads were in the different areas, we've got people all over, not only Caldwell County, but in other places as well. And so we wanted to be cautious. I'm a very conservative person. So I don't like taking risks unnecessarily, and I figure, hey, we've all got the ability to get on and to watch, and so we'll just take it for what it is. And tonight we will try and have our classes for anybody that's able to get out and wants to get out. So it looks like we've got several others. Hey, there's Beverly, good to see you, and Brad and Natalie, and Katie, and Brandon, and Rocky, and Tuffer. So good to see everybody. So let's go ahead and we're going to jump in. I want to look at Acts chapter 6, and we're going to do our announcement at the end of today's live stream. So just so you know, that's what we're going to be doing. I hope that everybody will stick with us until that. So let me go over and pull up my Bible here. I want to read Acts chapter 6, verses 1 through 8 real quick, and talk about this situation that was going on in the early church, and that has some major significance for us today. So Acts chapter 6, starting with verse 1, this is what we read. Now at that time, while the disciples were increasing in number, a complaint arose on the part of the Hellenistic Jews against the native Hebrews, because their widows were being overlooked in the daily serving of food. So the 12 summoned the congregation of the disciples and said, "It is not desirable for us to neglect the word of God in order to serve tables. Therefore, brethren, select from among you 7 men of good reputation, full of the Spirit and of wisdom, whom we may put in charge of this task. But we will devote ourselves to prayer and to the ministry of the word." The statement found approval with the whole congregation, and they chose Stephen, a man full of faith and of the Holy Spirit, and Philip, Prochorus, Nicanor, Timon, Parmenas, and Nicholas, a proselyte from Antioch. And these they brought before the apostles, and after praying, they laid their hands on them. The word of God kept on spreading, and the number of the disciples continued to increase greatly in Jerusalem, and a great many of the priests were becoming obedient to the faith. And Stephen, full of grace and power, was performing great wonders and signs among the people. Oh, well, tell Bonnie hi for me, Rocky. Good to see that she's with us as well. So, real quick, let's look at this Acts chapter 6. There was a problem in the church. The problem was now everybody here is Jews. These are Jews who are becoming Christians, but there are two kinds of Jews. It talks about the Hellenistic Jews and the Hebraic Jews. And the difference between those is that the Hebraic Jews, the Hebrew Jews, are the Jews who grew up in Jerusalem, who grew up in Israel, and as a result, their native language is Aramaic, and so they're speaking this Semitic language. They're from here. They're probably a little more strict, a little more conservative in the way that they practice their Jewish faith, and so they become Christians, and they're the core part of the church. In fact, they are the insiders of the church, if you will, because they're the ones who are from Jerusalem, who have all the connections in Jerusalem, and so when the church starts to grow in Jerusalem, they're the ones who are sort of the insiders of the church. Meanwhile, you have these what it calls Hellenistic Jews, and Hellenistic Jews are Jews who grew up outside of Israel in other parts of the Hellenistic or Greek world, and so these are likely Jews who grew up speaking Greek. They grew up culturally Greek rather than culturally, Jewish or Judean, I guess would be the word. And so these are Hellenistic Jews who grew up with this Greek language, and they're probably not quite as conservative in their Judaism. but they happen to be in Jerusalem. And so they join the church as well. They hear the gospel, they hear that Jesus has died for their sins, and they respond in faith and said, hey, I want to be a part of what God's doing in the world. And so you have these native Hebraic Jews who grew up there and who speak, Aramaic. And then you have these foreign Hellenistic Jews who speak Greek and are culturally Greek. And they're creating one church. And we all know what happens when you have people who have different beliefs and different ideas and different cultures and different ways of growing up, and you bring them together into one congregation or into one group of people. What happens? Well, you generally have problems that arise. Because one group says this is the way we ought to do it, and the other group says, well, this is the way that we ought to do it, and you have conflict. And this has been sort of the history of the church for the past 2,000 years, is groups of people getting together who don't particularly see eye to eye on a lot of peripheral issues, and yet who are both committed to the kingdom of God and committed to Christ and committed to the gospel, and they're trying to live and become the church that God has created them to be together, even though they don't necessarily agree on a lot of things. This is the problem. And so here's the issue in particular for them, is you have these Hellenistic, these sort of foreign outsider Jews who become Christians, and their widows are not being taken care of. See, in that day, there was no social safety net, and women generally couldn't have couldn't get a very good job. And so it was difficult for them to survive on their own and make their own money and provide for themselves, provide a place to live, provide for food and things. And so they relied on the men in their life. And so if they had a father as a young girl, then they would rely on him. And once they got married, they would rely on their husband. And once they were older, if their husband died, they would rely on their sons. The problem is, if you had widows who didn't have sons, and they were a little bit older, maybe now they no longer have a husband, they no longer have a father, and they don't have any sons, who takes care of them? Well, I'll tell you who's not going to take care of them: the government. Because in this day, the government didn't take care of anybody. So you have these widows who are in this predicament, and the church comes along and says, well, we are your family, we are your brothers and sisters, and we will take care of you. And so the church from the very beginning was committed to caring for the widows and the orphans, to caring for those who couldn't take care of themselves. We see this even in the last verse of the first chapter of James, where James says that pure and undefiled religion is this: caring for orphans and widows in their affliction and remaining unspotted by the world. So what was going on in Jerusalem was all of the widows of the church were being cared for by the church. The problem was that it was the insider widows who were getting all of the food and the care, and the outsider widows were not getting concerned with. And it's not that the Hebraic people, these Hebraic Christians, didn't care about those on the outside. It's just that they didn't even enter their minds. I mean, you might think of congregations that you've been a part of, but you have felt that this way in the past, that you look at a church and you feel like there's sort of this in-group, and they're all committed to taking care of each other, and then you kind of feel like you're on the outside looking in, and it's like nobody really cares about you, nobody really contacts you, nobody's concerned if you're not there, that kind of thing. And this is what was going on in Jerusalem 2,000 years ago, is you had these Hellenistic Jews who their widows were not being cared for. And like I said, it wasn't that the other ones didn't care about them. It's just that they weren't on their minds because they weren't immediately, known to them. So this is a major problem, and it's a major problem because this has the potential to create eternal, to leave eternal ripples, negative ripples. I mean, think about it. This has the potential to split the early church wide open before it really even gets started. This is within the first 5 years, first 3 years of the life of the church. If this would have been allowed to go on, it could have split the church and destroyed the church and destroyed any ability for the kingdom to go forward. It would have also destroyed the witness of the early church. I mean, think about it. If all of those Hellenistic Jews left the church, then they would be telling their neighbors, hey, don't go around those Christians over there because all they care about is themselves. That they're not concerned with anybody else. And so it would have destroyed the witness of the early church if this would have been allowed to go on. It would also have put a stop to the kingdom impact that the church was having. If you go back to that verse 1, it says, now at this time, all the disciples were increasing in number. And so the church is going forward and the gospel is being proclaimed and people are responding and people are getting saved. And we see all of this good stuff taking place. This problem has the potential to put a stop to all of this. So what can be done? Well, here's what can be done. The disciples, the 12, this would have been, the 11 disciples minus Judas, plus Matthias, the disciple who was added in Acts chapter 1. They gather the congregation together and they say, hey, This is a needed ministry. We need people who will make sure that all of these widows will be served and taken care of. And we need it not just for the Hebraic widows, the widows that you are really good friends with and that you call whenever you don't have anything to do and that you like to go visit, but it also, we need to take care of these Hellenistic widows who right now are on the outskirts. And we actually need to bring them onto the inside. We need to make them, insiders as well and not leave them on the fringes. And so they say, here's what we need to do. We need to figure out somebody that can do this because we can't. Because we don't have the time to do this because we're committed to what they call the ministry of the word and the prayer. And so the apostles are essentially saying, listen, God has gifted and equipped us in a particular way. And he wants us to do this ministry. But this ministry over here still needs to be done. So we need to figure out who can do this ministry. So they say, select from among yourselves 7 men of good reputation, full of the spirit and of wisdom, whom we may put in charge of this task. It looks like John is on too. I want to say hi to John. Good to see you, as well as several others that looks like they're coming on right now. So the 12 say, listen, select 7 men from among you that we can put in charge of this, because this is a needed ministry, and it needs to be taken care of. Now, interestingly enough, all 7 of these men, starting with Stephen and ending with Nicholas, all 7 of these men have Hellenistic names. In other words, they are particularly equipped to minister to these Hellenistic widows who are not being cared for. These 7 guys probably know exactly which widows are not receiving what needs to be received. And so they've probably already got relationships with those widows. So here are people, these 7 men can sort of bridge the gap between the insiders and the outsiders and hopefully turn those outsiders into insiders. So we see an important point here. And the important point is this, that ministry comes in all shapes and sizes, and that none are more important than others, that every one of them is necessary. Listen, this is something that Paul stresses in several of his letters. Let me just show you a couple. In Romans chapter 12, starting with verse 3, look at what Paul writes. He says, "For through the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think, but to think so as to have sound judgment, as God has allotted to each a measure of faith. For just as we have many members in one body, and all the members do not have the same function, so we, who are many, are one body in Christ, and individually members one of another. Since we have gifts that differ according to the grace given to us, each of us is to exercise them accordingly. If prophecy, according to the proportion of his faith. If service, in his serving. Or he who teaches, in his teaching. Or he who exhorts, in his exhortation. He who gives, with liberality. He who leads, with diligence. He who shows mercy, with cheerfulness. Let love be without hypocrisy. Abhor what is evil. Cling to what is good." Paul says, listen, everybody has a gift. For some, it's giving. For some, it's prophecy. For some, it's service. For some, it's teaching. For others, it's exhortation. For others, it's leading, or it's showing mercy, or it's any number of things. And Paul says every one of us has a gift. Every one of us has a ministry. Every one of us has some way that God has called and created us and equipped us to serve. In other words, there is no part of the body that is supposed to sit idle. Just like a human body, every part of our human bodies is meant for a purpose. It has a task to do. There's no part of your body that just sits there doing nothing. Even the appendix has a purpose. And what Paul says is, just as every part of your body has a purpose, every person in the church, the body of Christ, has a purpose, has a ministry to be involved in. And so it may not look like what we think of normally as ministry. For example, I know a church, talked to a pastor just this last week, and he was telling me how somebody in his congregation came up to him one day and they said, "Hey, I'm passionate about cars. I love cars. I love going to car shows." And he said, "I want our church to do a car show so that we can raise money for the youth and be able to equip them to do more." Now, the pastor looked at him and said, "Well, that sounds great." And this guy happened to have some knowledge about how to put on a car show and what all went into it, what needed to be done, and how to plan it, and how to make the connections and all of this. And so he said, take it and run. And the guy goes and he starts this car show, and it becomes one of the biggest car shows in their community. And they get, hundreds of people who are coming to this car show, and who not only are now being connected to the church there, but also this car show is raising money so that the youth can do ministry. And this is having eternal significance. And all it is a car show. This is a ministry, a service that is not something we normally think of as some, great ministry. It's not something we in our minds think of when that word comes up. And yet, here is somebody who's taken his passion and has turned this passion into a form of service or ministry. I think this is what Paul's getting at. And I think if car shows were around back then, Paul might very well say, if putting on car shows in his, doing that. Now, this isn't the only place that we get this kind of an idea. Over in Ephesians chapter 4, we see something similar. Paul says in Ephesians 4, starting with verse 11 and going down through verse 13, and Jesus gave some as apostles and some as prophets and some as evangelists and some as pastors and teachers for the equipping of the saints for the work of service to the building up of the body of Christ, until we all attain to the unity of the faith and of the knowledge of the Son of God, to a mature man, to the measure of the stature which belongs to the fullness of Christ. What Paul says here is God has given us apostles and prophets and evangelists and pastors and teachers, not to do all of the ministry, but to equip the saints, that's you and me and all of us, for the work of service, or if you look up this word, it could also be translated, and in fact, I think in the King James it is, ministry. In other words, and this is exactly what the early church was doing, this is what the 12 said, they said, we exist to equip you to go out and do ministry, to do service. We might think of it this way. Would it be better for one man, a pastor or a woman, for one person as a pastor to serve 10 people? Or would it be better for one person to equip 10 people to serve 10 people? See, that's the difference between 10 people being served and 100 people being served. And what the church should be is a place where the handful of leaders who are committed to the ministry of the word and prayer are equipping everyone in the congregation, who are then going out and serving everyone that's in their sphere of influence. That's the difference between a congregation being served and a community being served. And what we as a church want to be is not a congregation that's served, but we want to be a force that serves our community. Now, what does all of this mean? Well, it means that you have a ministry. You have a service that God has created and called and equipped you to do. And maybe you already know what it is, but maybe you don't. Maybe you're still wondering. Maybe you think about that idea and it kind of scares you. Well, here's what I would encourage you to ask. 4 questions. The first one, what are you passionate about? For this guy that I was talking about a minute ago, he was passionate about car shows. That's why he found his ministry there. But for you, it may be something else. It may be fishing, or it may be hunting, or it may be, shopping. I don't know. But I guarantee you there is a way to use that passion and to steer it to a ministry goal. What are you passionate about? The second thing is, how has God gifted you? What are the gifts that you have that God has put in you to use to serve others? The third one is, what do you have a burden for? What do you have a hard time sleeping because you know there is this issue, this problem in our community or in our country that you needs to be addressed and solved? What keeps you up at night? What do you have a burden for? And the last one is, what have others affirmed in you? What have others said? Hey, you're really good at this. You're really talented at this. Or, I'm always encouraged when you do X, Y, or Z. What have others affirmed in you? Now, there's one other point that I want to make in this. Not only are there all kinds of ministries, but every kind of ministry, because you may be thinking at this point, well, I've got this interest and I might be able to turn this into some kind of ministry, but I don't see any way that it could have eternal consequence. And that's where Acts chapter 6 offers us exactly how it can. I want you to imagine for a minute what would have happened if this problem would have been allowed to go on, if the apostles would have just said, you know what, we get so much to do, we're not going to worry about it. Or, on the other hand, if they would have burned themselves out trying to get all of it done, doing it all themselves. Well, imagine with me what might have happened. My guess is there would have been widows who were going hungry if they wouldn't have dealt with this issue. And those Hellenistic widows would have eventually gotten upset and maybe felt bitter and angry because they're looking over at all of the Hebraic widows and thinking, well, they're all taken care of, and why aren't we? The church must not care about me. And so they would have become bitter and angry about this, and they would have probably left the church, and they would have started, talking to other people about what a selfish and self-centered church that is, that they were a part of. and the church would have been weakened as a result. Its witness would have been weakened. It would have quit growing as it was. It would have stopped having the community impact that it was having. The gospel would have failed to make an impact like it was supposed to. The kingdom would have faltered and failed to advance, and the church would have withered on the vine. In other words, the consequences to not dealing with this seemingly, mundane, temporal kind of a need, the consequences would have been eternal. And they would have been immense. In other words, all ministry has the potential for eternal consequence. All ministry has the potential for eternal consequence. From the people who serve and make food to give out to others. I knew a lady in Ohio who, she would wake up at like 3 o'clock in the morning and spend hours making peanut butter sandwiches for homeless people. And then she would go out and she would serve all those homeless people, and had built deep connections with these homeless people in her community. Now, somebody might look at making peanut butter sandwiches and think, well, what kind of eternal consequence could that have? I guarantee you that she has made an eternal consequence. She's had an eternal consequence in the lives of individuals. And she's done it not through preaching to them. She's done it primarily through serving them, through helping them, and through being there for them. Likewise, who would have thought that a car show would have had eternal consequences? And yet this church that I'm talking about, they have been able to fund their youth program and allow their youth to do ministry that they otherwise would not have done. And they've made connections through this car show, and it's resulted in eternal consequences through a car show. And that's not something that we tend to think, oh yeah, that's a really spiritual thing. And yet it can be. In fact, I would venture to say that almost anything that's not sinful could be something, a ministry that could have an eternal consequence. It has a potential to advance the kingdom. And so this is what I want to leave you with for the devotion. And then I'm going to share our announcement. We do not exist. The church does not exist. And Rock Chapel does not exist to have worship services. That is not why we are here. It's not why God called us. It's not why He's brought us together. God did not call us to have worship services. He called us to advance His kingdom and proclaim His gospel. That is what we exist to do. As a result, it should be our primary task and goal to advance His kingdom and to proclaim His gospel through every possible means that we have. All of which have the potential for eternal consequences, whether you might think it at first glance or not. So I want to leave you with this question. What is your ministry? What is your ministry? Where has God placed you to serve? And if you can't think of an answer, then I would encourage you to ask those questions. What is my passion? How has God gifted me? What do I have a burden for? And what have others affirmed in me? And I want for you to pray and to maybe fast this week about, God, how would you have me serve in my community? How would you have me serve at Rock Chapel? And maybe it's something that we already do. Maybe it's, I really want us to see us have a thriving prayer ministry, and I want to commit myself to that. Or I really want to help with worship through singing or through making slides or through playing an instrument or working the nursery or teaching a class. Or maybe it's something like I really feel a burden to volunteer at hospice or the pregnancy care center. Or maybe it's something that we have never done before and that we need to do. That God has put a burden for you to do. Maybe it's a car show, or maybe it's, some sort of daycare thing, or maybe it's any number of things, a fishing tournament. There's an infinite number of possibilities. But it has to begin with, what am I passionate about? What has God put a burden on me to do? What has God gifted me to do? And what have others affirmed in me? And we begin to ask those questions. I believe that God will give us our ministries, give us ways to serve. And I want you to pray about that. I want you to pray about that this week of, God, how is it that I can serve? And the other thing I want you to do is I want you to join me on March the 7th at 6 p.m. because we will be having a special training, a church as a team training on March the 7th at 6 p.m. We're going to have a barbecue dinner before, and then we're going to have that training. I've got a pastor from South Carolina who's coming up and is going to conduct a training to walk us through and help to equip us to work together as a team to advance the kingdom and to proclaim the gospel. And so next week, we will have on the bulletin, there will be a little check mark that you can make to let me know that you will be there, and that whether you want to eat, whether you want to have, eat part of the barbecue dinner or not, you'll be able to check that, and then we'll eat that evening at 5:30, and then at 6:15 we will have that special training. And I believe it will be a wonderful time for us to reflect on how we can serve better together. Now, with all of that said, let me share with you this announcement that I mentioned earlier, and that is very important, and that we need you to be praying about, we need to be fasting about. So let me pull up my PowerPoint real quick so that I can see where I'm going. All right. So, hopefully we'll be good. All right. I want to share with you, looking towards the future, where we're at and where we're going, where God wants us to go. That's our hope, is that we don't just want to make moves forward. We want to seek God's will. So I want to share with you first a little bit about our predicament, where we're at, and what our response has been. So since I have gotten to Rock Chapel, the Department of Transportation has left us in limbo. It was about 3 months after I arrived that Dan, one of our board members, heard that the road may be widened, that 321A might be widened, and we might lose our sign. And so we didn't know a whole lot of details at that point, but we knew that was a possibility. And so there were these questions about, well, what was going to happen, and what do we need to do to prepare, and all of this. Well, I believe it was later that year, or perhaps early the next year, that we found out, this would have been in 2019, late 2018, early 2019, where we found out what they were actually proposing. And what they were proposing was taking our entire piece of property, the church, the parsonage, the parking, everything, that they weren't going to leave us with anything, because the new road was essentially going to bisect our property. And so that was made official in 2019, and they told us that it was probably going to happen in 2020, that they were going to start looking at buying our property. Well, this made me feel like there's no reason for us to rush into lots and lots of outreach right now, because if we're going to be moving and potentially having other changes going on, it would be best, and especially if it's going to happen that soon, it would be best for us to just sort of, prepare and spend this time preparing ourselves for the move, rather than outreach, and then, a year from now, the church is missing, and people who used to drive by and see it are thinking, well, where'd that church go that I used to, we used to come for this event and that event and the other event. And so I thought, well, let's prepare ourselves. Let's spend the next year sort of preparing. Unfortunately, the project was postponed. And then when COVID hit, it was postponed until 2024 to 2025. And so this is what they've told us now, that they are planning on, sorry, I had a visitor. That they are planning on moving forward with purchasing the property between 2024 and 2025, sometime in that time frame. So that has given us a few years. It's pushed it back several years now, which gives us the opportunity to approach it a little more intentionally, and to really prepare ourselves, and to begin doing some tremendous ministry. Now, a couple of weeks ago, when I preached on fasting, I asked all of you to be fasting, that God would provide the perfect piece of property. Now, I'm gonna share with you something, because you don't know this. The board has been looking for property for the past 2.5 years. We have had our eyes open. In fact, we have gone and looked at 3 or 4 pieces of property, and every one of them has had major issues. We've looked at one that was just right down the road from the church. One of them already had a church on it. Unfortunately, the church was only, the sanctuary had a maximum size of about 100 people, which would have put a cap on our any growth at all. And the rest of the property was kind of a small, I think it was about 2 acres, and it really had a steep slope. We looked at another piece of property that wasn't too far, but the way that the property was laying, it would have required a lot of grading and changes to make it even workable as something that would be possible. And so it really was kind of prohibitively expensive as a result of that. So we've looked at several properties. We haven't brought any of them to you up until now, and the reason is because none of them were compelling enough to the board. I mean, we've gone and we've looked and we've seen, and it's been like, well, we could work this, but there's got to be something better. There's got to be something better. So this past week, we found a piece of property that finally we believe is is worthwhile and is worth the congregation considering. Now, with this said, like every piece of property, it's got pros and it's got cons, and we as the board and I as your pastor want to be as transparent with you as possible, and want you to understand both the pros and the cons because they're there. Before I show you the property itself, though, I want to kind of share our method for searching, how we decided what to look for, where to look. All right. So the first one is we looked at where all of our members are. Now, I made this map when I first found out that we were going to be moving, and so there are a handful of people who are not on it, including my house, because I've moved since then. So there were a handful of people who were over here in west of Valdez. But this is an approximation, it's pretty close, of where most of the people in the congregation are located. So we looked at this and we decided, okay, we need to figure out where we're going to be. Obviously, we would love to be as close to where we are now as possible. But the likelihood of us getting a piece of property in downtown Granite Falls is practically non-existent, certainly one that would be able to build on and everything. So what we looked at was trying to create a space that's look at an area that's where it's never more than about 10 minutes from the church, so that nobody is going to have a way longer drive. And so plus or minus 10 minutes, maybe 11 or 12, 13 minutes at the most, but we didn't want to go over 15 minutes in any direction. And here's the thing we've got to remember, that because our members are scattered so out in so many different directions, no matter where we go, we will probably be adding 5 to 10 minutes at the least to somebody's drive. And there's a good chance, because of the way that we're spread, that we'll be adding 5 to 10 minutes on a large chunk of people's drive. So this is, hold on a second, I'm getting a call. It's nobody from church. So this is kind of the search area that we were looking in, where we're about plus or minus 10 minutes from the congregation. The other thing that we really wanted to do was stay in Caldwell County, because that's where we have been, and that we just wanted to stay here. So it gives you an idea of where we were searching. Now, some of you may wonder, well, why didn't you say 5 minutes, plus or minus 5 minutes from the church? The reason for that is, if you look at what plus or minus 5 minutes from the church would be, you're looking at such a small area that we almost certainly would never find a good workable piece of property in that area. I mean, you're not even getting out really to Grace Chapel. You're looking in Granite Falls and Sawmills, and right there towards Rhodus. But you've not got a lot of space to look. So this is why we decided plus or minus 10 minutes. Again, it's some people are going to have to drive longer no matter where we go. This is just the reality of the way things are. So that was factor one that we had. The second factor was, we want to be in a place that has the opportunity for community growth and for ministry opportunities. We don't want to move to a place where there's no growth projected in the future. We want to be in a place where there is growth projected, where down the road, because again, this is a long-term thing. Remember, we will not be making the move for at least 4 to 5 years from now, and that's if the state doesn't do anything else. So we're thinking long-term here. And that's why we wanted to consider, all right, where is there growth? And what you can see on this map is all of the darkly colored sections are projected above average growth, and the sort of lightly colored sections are below average growth. So this was the second factor that we sort of had in our minds as we were looking. The third thing is I wanted to consider, and I shared all of this with you back when we first established this, but I just wanted to refresh your memory. The other factor that we wanted to consider was, where are there other churches? Because, we don't really want to be, I'm not the kind of person who wants to be in competition with another congregation. I believe that we should be working with our neighbors, our brothers and sisters who are in different congregations and a part of different denominations, rather than seeing ourselves as the McDonald's to their Burger King. I'm not a fan of the competitive, sort of view of church. So, but we didn't really want to go where there's already churches. And in particular, I didn't want to go where there are already other churches of God, because we share, beliefs. And so we're pretty much the same. And it, to me, would just feel really competitive. So this is a map of where other churches were. And again, this was something that was just in the back of my mind. When it comes to the other churches of God, there's one in Lenore. There's one right here in Hickory, just across the river. There's one in Drexel. There's two in Morganton. So I kind of had that in the back of my mind as as we were preparing. So, where is the property that we are proposing this morning? The property is 8.4 miles northeast of where we are now. It's on Charlie Little Road. It's 6015 Charlie Little Road, and it's about 12 minutes from our current location. It is on the very edge of where we were searching. Admittedly, it's on the very edge. This is the major drawback. And I think that everybody on the board acknowledges that. When we went and looked at it, we all agreed that the biggest drawback to this property is the fact that it is at the very edge of where we were looking. And so as a result, it had to be really compelling for us to bring it to you. But what this means is that for some people, it will be a little bit longer, up to 12 minutes. Now, I don't think it will be longer than 12 minutes for anybody because, you know, all you got to do if it seems to be is drive to the church and then drive the 12 minutes there. But for a handful of people, it will be, you know, up to 12 minutes further. For most people, I'm thinking it's probably going to be more like, if it's longer, it's going to be more like 5 to 10 minutes. But for a handful of people, it will be a little bit over 10 minutes. For me, for example, I'm one of the people that it will be 12 minutes further for me because I'm coming all the way from, you know, down here in close to Valdez. So this is something that, you know, this is just... It's just one of those things, and we'll get into it a little bit more here in a second. So I want to show you, this is the property. It says $209,000 on the listing. The reason I have the cost is $199,000 is because if you'll notice down here in the bottom, it says contingent. The reason it says contingent is because the board put an offer on it. Now, I don't want you to get scared or feel like the board is trying to move and without anybody's permission or acknowledgement. That's not it at all. Let me explain why the board put an offer on it for $199,000. The reason why is we went and looked at it this last week, and when we did, we all agreed that this was worth considering for the congregation. Now, this doesn't mean that we said, hey, this is where it's got to be, but we said this is worth the church looking at and considering. The problem was, well, let me say this too. It had been on the market for about 3 months. And so we were thinking, well, you know, let's announce it and let the congregation come out and look at it, and we can talk about it and have everybody pray and fast, and then we can make a decision whether we want to pursue it or not. The following day, there was an offer on it. The following day after that, there was the potential of another offer. And so it was looking as if the church didn't act, if the board didn't act, then it was going to be gone, and we wouldn't even be able to consider it. So the board decided that we would put an offer on it with the contingency that the congregation has an opportunity to look at it and decide whether we want it or not. If the congregation looks at it and we pray about it and we decide we don't want it, then we're not out anything. Somebody has offered to cover the $500 fee that we would be out. And so the church won't be out anything if we decide, you know what, this isn't the best location for us. But if we decide that it is, then we're also not out anything, and we have a great piece of property. So that's the reason that we put an offer on it. Like I said, the offer is contingent on the congregation looking at it and approving it. So this is why I put that the offer is, or the cost is $199,000. Is that's what our offer was, and the owner agreed to those terms. So as you can see, it's about 25 acres. Now, you might ask, why this property? What is so compelling about this? Let me share a little bit about that with you. First of all, it lies within the search area. It's that plus or minus 10 minutes from the location. Albeit it's on the edge, but it is within those bounds. It also, though, offers enough space not only for us now, but for us forever, for all future growth. I don't think that you could ever use all 25 acres. We couldn't as a congregation. There would be no reason for us to. And so it gives us the possibility to stretch our arms and to grow and to do what we need to do, and never to feel like we do right now, which is, you know, man, it would really be nice if we had this building right next to us so that we could, you know, kind of get out of this cramped feeling that we have. We'll never have to worry about not having enough parking like the church has in the past. So this is one of those things that it is really attractive, is it gives us plenty of opportunity for growth. The third thing is that it is affordable, that there is no financing needed, that we have, I believe, and Sherry can check me on this, and I guess put it in the down in the chat if she wants to. I believe we have about $270,000 in the the building fund, which means that we can afford to purchase this, and we don't have to finance it. We don't have to get into any debt, and we also don't have to cut into operating expenses. And so we're able to do this, with no additional baggage for us. And honestly, it's like if down the road we decided, hey, we found another property that was even better, we could potentially sell this and buy that. So this offers, is an affordable piece of property and I think that's an attractive thing. Not only that, but it is in the center of an area with expected growth. If you'll look at this map down here, you can see I've got this circle centered on the church, and all three of these areas, as well as this area up here and the area down there at the bottom, all three of these, this is a 5-mile radius, these are all projected above average growth in the future. And remember, this is not setting us up for next year, because we won't be there next year or the next year or probably the next year or the next year. I mean, we're looking 4 to 5 years down the road. This sets us up for that long-term placement and strategy, and I think that that's one of the other benefits. The last benefit to this property is that there are fewer churches per capita than where we are right now. So, for example, if everybody within a 5-mile radius of this new location went to church, every church that's currently there would have 1,300 people in it. If every church where Rock Chapel is, within a 5-mile radius, our current location, if everybody there went to church at one of the churches that's already established, every church would have about 100 people less. So we have fewer churches per capita in this new location, potentially. So that's another reason why this church was attractive. So what are the ministry opportunities? Well, let me share this with you. Within a 5-mile radius of this prospective location, there are 31,764 people. That's a lot of opportunities that we would have. One of the things that this situates us for is making connections with various schools. For example, when I was going to visit it, I passed right by Gateway School. And Gateway School, interestingly enough, is a school that I went and I met with the principal and I talked with him about developing a partnership between Rock Chapel and Gateway, because Gateway is one of those underserved schools that not a lot of other churches really cares to get involved with because of some of the circumstances. And so this would put us less than 2 miles from this school that we had already started trying to build a relationship with. It also puts us within about 3 miles of West Alexander Middle and Dudley Shoals Elementary. So we've got 3 schools that are all very different and all provide us an opportunity to make connections and to build relationships with not only the teachers and staff, but also with students. So this is tremendous. The next thing is that this is a perfect Celebrate Recovery site. I've talked with Kim about maybe starting a Celebrate Recovery in the future. I really am excited about that possibility. And in fact, I talked to Nathan about it because I know they have one over in Greenville. I've talked to some other pastors. I've even went to one of the Celebrate Recoveries here in Granite at Day 3 Church to kind of check it out. One of the hesitancies I'd had was we're only right now a mile away from Day 3, and they have one. And there's also one that's towards Lenoir, not quite in Lenoir, but towards there. And there's another one that's kind of west of us. But there is no Celebrate Recovery over on the east side of Hickory at all. I mean, there's not one in Bethlehem. There's not one even south of the river. So this would put us at a prime, perfect spot for starting a Celebrate Recovery. And everybody that we would be around would be people who didn't have access to one right now. And so this would be a great ministry opportunity, I think, for us. I know that Nathan has shared the impact that it's had on their congregation. It's been very, very positive. And the other pastors I've talked to have said the same. The other thing is we have the potential, and this is something that I would really like to expand on in the future, something I'm excited about the possibilities of, is to really help foster families. I want our congregation to be one that serves foster families. I would love to be known as the congregation that serves foster families because that's where we as a congregation are already gifted. We've already got numerous people who are foster parents, and we have people who work in the system. And so to me, it just fits our gifting, kind of like what I was talking about earlier. And so I would love to see us, develop a daycare and an after-school program and be able to really focus on ministering to foster parents and foster care families. I would love to see that happen. I actually called this week the Caldwell and Alexander, the people who were over there, the daycare services, and talked to them about the potential for a daycare in this area and the potential of ministering to foster families in this area. And I haven't heard back from the Alexander person, but the Caldwell person, was very enthusiastic about it and said that it was definitely a need in the area. So those are all near-term things that we could get started on before we even make the move. We could already begin doing outreach. Long-term, this property allows us the possibility of creating community walking trails. I mean, when you get to the back of it, it's just beautiful, area that you could turn into walking trails. And I think that anybody who is able to go when we go will see this potential. Picnic areas, the potential for a sports field, a baseball or soccer or something. Really make this a community center. That's what I would like to see. I don't want to build a building that we use once a week or twice a week or even 3 times a week. I want, if we're going to put the money into this, to our move, I believe we need to use it throughout the week and to be a place where the community is served and where we are servants to the community. So let me show you real quick. This is the front of the property. I'm going to move this so that you can see the whole thing. This is the whole plot right here, the 24.7 acres. You can see up here is Charlie Little Road down here at the bottom. And this is just sort of a proposal for what things would look like, the driveway and the parking over here on the right, and then the facility right here. And as you can see, there is plenty of space for potential growth in the future. That's what all of this is for. So that's why I said earlier that with a piece of property like this, we would never run out of space. The other thing that's good about this property that we've seen with other properties, and probably, if you've ever looked for a home around here, you've seen, is that in a lot of properties, the land is craggy and there's lots of dips and steep valleys and things. While this property, being as large as it is, has some of those, this whole first half is just sort of a steady incline, and then it tops out right here in the center of it, and you have kind of a flat area that you could do a lot with. So this provides, like I said, plenty of space, and it lays very well. That's one of the other really attractive things, because I think everybody on the board has seen how difficult it is to find a piece of property that is large enough, that lays well enough, and that's also close enough. And so this is one of the advantages, is the lay and the size of it. All right, so if we were to go forward with this property, what would it look like? I want to share with you sort of my plan, and we're getting close to the end, so if you're getting tired, I understand. Looking ahead, if we move forward on this property, here's my proposed plan. And honestly, even if we don't move forward on this property, but we find another one, this is still what I would like to see us do. But with this property in mind, phase 1 would look like, over the next 1 to 2 years, that we sort of establish a beachhead in our community and that we begin doing outreach there now. That we don't wait until we move the congregation, but we start reaching out to the community right now. And so what does this look like? Well, within the next 1 to 2 years, that we would purchase a piece of property, in this case, this property, that we would lay that new driveway and we would lay those parking lots, and that we would build an outdoor pavilion that has a bathroom and a small kitchenette and some storage space. Something maybe that looks like one of these. These are just, examples, pictures to let your mind kind of imagine what that would look like. The goal of all of this would be to celebrate our fall fling in September of this year at that new property. And so we could go there and have a cookout and have volleyball and do all that at that new location. And we could begin having fellowship time at that new location to build memories at that new location. This is something that I think is really important for us as a congregation to begin doing that. The second thing that I would like for us to do is to have start doing community outreach in that new location by the end of this year. If we move forward, I've been told, and I don't know anything about building, but I've been told that we could have something like this up by October. And if we do, what I would love to see us do is have our fall festival this year, a big fall festival at that new location in that community. And so that's sort of phase 1. And so we would begin over the next 1 to 2 years doing outreach in that area and starting to have fellowship time in that area, doing picnics there, maybe even having a Bible study during the summer at that place, or during the fall, have a fire pit and do a Bible study outside, that sort of thing at that new location beginning as soon as possible. Now, this doesn't mean, so I want you to hear this, this does not mean that we're talking about moving worship there. Because like I said earlier, we would not be moving worship there until the church where we currently are is taken. So we're talking 4 to 5 years. But within the next 1 to 2 years, we establish that beachhead. We begin doing outreach, begin doing fellowship. The second phase would be kind of a 2-year phase where we look at building new connections with that community, where we plan and build a fellowship hall with classrooms. And the reason that I would like for us to do that first rather than a sanctuary is because we've already got a sanctuary right now. And so if we build a fellowship hall and some classrooms over there, then we can begin doing community outreach and open it up for Bible studies over there, for small groups throughout the year that want to meet over there on that side of town. They can do it, and we could have small groups over on my side of town for those who live on this side, and kind of be able to through the week have both sites open, and then on Sunday morning still worship at our current facility. But we could start to really focus our outreach efforts. If we had a facility, we could really start to focus our outreach efforts where we're going to be on the future rather than where we are right now that we're going to lose. The other thing that I would love to see us do is to make plans to start a daycare, to start after-school care at that new location, and to make that a prime ministry. I've got a pastor friend, who lives east, and he's told me that they have had a daycare and an after-school program at their congregation for a number of years, probably 15 or more. And he said that half the people in their congregation has come through connections they've made through that after-school and daycare. I think that's a need that we have, and I think that it has the potential for being a great outreach and a way to serve. So that's something that I would like for us to sort of look at that phase 2. The final phase would be that phase 3, the following 2 years, where we would actually make the move, where we would build that sanctuary, that new sanctuary. And if you'll notice, the pictures that I chose, and again, these are all just pictures that I just chose randomly. There's no commitment here. But I chose pictures purposely with a rock background in the sanctuary because I would love to see us use some of those rocks from Rock Chapel in the building of that new facility, if nothing else, as decoration and as decor. So that is something that I did on purpose. So we will look at that final phase, building that sanctuary, and then moving there only once we lost our current facility. But we would then begin to plan and move forward and look at future ministry opportunities and things. So this is sort of the steps that I would like to see us take over the next 4, 5, 6, 7 years. Again, this is not something that's going to happen tomorrow or the next year or 2 years from now. It's a long-term strategy and a long-term plan. I think it's important to remember because when we talk about this, it's easy to feel like, that's going to make this big change right now. Nothing's going to change right now. And so, somebody on the board made mention this past week, they said, by the time we actually made the move, Annabelle would be close to driving. And I thought about that, and I thought, man, you're right. That is crazy to think about. But there's going to be a lot of things that are changing anyway in the next 5 years. I think this will set us up to really be able to move forward with confidence and with boldness. Now, I know what some of you may be thinking. I understand, and I want to address a couple of concerns right now, right out of the bat. The first one is that isn't this property too far from some people? And the answer is, yeah, it is far for some people. But I would say this, the first thing, that it is not as far as what you might think. That there are a number of people, that when we were first looking at this, I thought, okay, well, so we're going to be adding 12 minutes to all of these people over here on my side of town. And then when I started actually doing the math using Google Maps, I discovered that there were a lot of people, because they were going in different ways, they weren't quite adding as long as what I had expected. Now, there are some people who will be, but not everybody. Don't feel like if you're on our side of town that you're automatically definitely going to be adding 12 minutes. That may not be the case. That's why I want you to drive it this week and see exactly how far it is for you. But it will add, admittedly, it will add 12 minutes to some people's drive. And I say that because it will add 12 minutes to my drive. Like I said, I'm over here close to Valdez, and so it's an extra 12 minutes for me. But the reality is, and I think this is what we all have to sort of come to terms with, is that no matter where we go, any property that we find is probably going to add at least 5 to 10 minutes for a large number of people, for probably about half of the congregation. And my concern is that we'll find, a property like this that's got the lay of the land, that's got, that's in a good area, a growing area, that's has a lot of potential, and it's a little bit too far. It's a little further than really we wish we could be, and we'll pass on it, and then we'll find another property 6 months from now. Because remember, we've been looking for 2 years, and we've looked at like 3 or 4 pieces of property. And we'll find another piece of property 6 months down the road, and it'll be great, but it'll be too far. And we'll keep looking, and what we'll realize is no matter where we find, there's going to be people that have to drive a little bit further. That's just kind of the fact of moving and things. And I think that maybe to soften that, we have to recognize again that this is something that is 5 years, 4 years, 6 years down the road. I mean, we don't know. And who knows, we could get to 2024, 2025, and the state come and say, well, it's going to be another 2 years. So this is a long-term plan. It's not something that's going to impact us right this second. It is only going to give us the opportunity to do outreach right now. So this is the benefit of it. And like I said earlier, if we eventually need to sell it or whatever, we can do that if something else comes up. So that's the answer to that question. If you've got that question, that would be the way that I would answer it, is that, yeah, it is going to add longer, but I think no matter where we go, we're probably going to end up adding longer drives for probably close to half the congregation, or a good number. And as I said earlier, it's probably for most people adds 5 to 10 minutes. For a handful of people like me, it will be 12 minutes. There may be some people that wonder, isn't this property too close to other large churches? If you know the area, you know there are a couple of larger churches in the area about 3 miles, 2.5 miles away. And I totally understand that concern. I think I also would recognize that everywhere we look, there's going to be, that problem is going to be there. We're going to be around other churches. At least this puts us 2.5 miles away instead of 50 feet away, which is unfortunately what we are now. And then the last question that I know some of you probably have, and you probably have other questions, but these are just ones that I know will come up. Why are we moving so quickly? Why did the board already put the offer on? And what's going on? In today's market, property doesn't last. I'm speaking from experience, because when we bought our house, it's like we had to act right then. And if we didn't act, then it was going to be gone. And so this is the first property for after 2 years of looking. This is the first property that we've seen and that we believe is worth your time and your prayer and your consideration. And if we were going to give you that time to consider it, then we had to act. And like I said before, we've made no commitments where we're not going to be out anything. It's purely just to give you the opportunity to consider this property. And that's what we're asking for, is for you to consider this property. We believe, the board believes, and I believe that this property has tremendous potential. That's the reason that I'm willing to drive 12 minutes further, because I think that the potential for this property is tremendous. But I want you to see that, and I want you to feel like God is leading us there. I don't want to do anything, and I don't believe the board wants to do anything that we don't feel like God is leading us to. So here are our next steps. The first thing I would ask you to do is to pray and to fast. Listen, what a perfect opportunity to practice what we've been preaching these past couple of weeks. That over these next 2 weeks, I want to encourage you to pray and to fast, to pick a day of the week, or maybe a meal of the week, or maybe something for the next 2 weeks, and earnestly pray and fast that if this is not where God wants us, that He would shut the door, that He would make it very clear, not just to 1 or 2 people, but to everybody, that this is not the direction that He wants us to go. Like I said earlier, I don't think anybody on the board, certainly not I, want to do something that's outside of God's will. So please, please, please commit yourself to praying and fasting about this decision before you just say, well, yeah, I think it's a great idea, or no, I don't want to do this. Please pray and fast. The second thing that I want to encourage you to do is, if you have any questions at all about this property or about anything, that you can email those questions to rockchapelmail@gmail.com, or you can text them to 770-337-7414. That's my number. You can send us any questions that you may have, and we will address all of those questions next Sunday after the service. So, pray and fast. Email any questions that you have. The third thing I want you to do is to drive to the property. Now, I said that the address is with the bulletin because I was planning on doing this at church. The address is not on the bulletin. I'm going to pull this up real quick so you can see. The address is 6015 Charlie Little Road, Granite Falls, North Carolina, 28630. If you need to, you can pause the video right now and you can write that down, because I want you to visit the property. I want you to drive it yourself and see how much it's going to change your drive time, and also kind of look around at the area and see what your thoughts are. And if you go and you have other questions, other questions come up, email them to rockchapelmail@gmail.com or text them to 770-337-7414. So, the last thing that I want to share with you is what we're going to do over the next 2 weeks. Next Sunday morning, any questions that have come in through the email or through the text message, we will address those questions. Any questions that we've received, we'll address those next Sunday morning after the service. next Sunday night at 6 p.m., we want to have an opportunity for everyone to go out to the property to see it, to see where we'll be building. If we end up moving forward with this, we're going to put out some flags to show where the building would be and kind of give us an idea of what it will look like. And we're just all going to meet there at 6 so that we can kind of walk the congregation through what that will look like. So I want to encourage you, if you're able, to come and to join us for that. And I want you to, then after that, there may be other questions that you hadn't thought of. And after you've been and you've seen it, you think, well, what about this or what about that? Then write those questions down and email them or text them to me. And the following Sunday morning, we will address those questions. That will be on February the 21st. February the 21st. Now, this is an important time, an important date, because after the morning service, we will address those questions, and then we will have a congregational vote. And so we'll give everyone the opportunity to vote. We will be giving absentee ballots to anybody who needs them during that week before. And so if you need it, if you're not going to be there on the 21st, and you want to vote, and we want you to vote, then make sure you get an absentee ballot. Let me know, or let Sherry know, or let one of the other board members know, and we will get you an absentee ballot so that you can vote, and that this can be a congregational decision, not a board decision, and not a pastor decision. This is something that the congregation has to decide, and the congregation is going to. So those are the plans for the next 2 weeks. Remember, pray and fast, email any questions or text any questions. If you want to drive to the property before, you can. If you're able to join us next Sunday night at 6, do that then, so we won't have classes next Sunday. And then on the 21st, we will have a congregational vote in the morning. And if it passes, then we will move forward. We will purchase the property, and we will begin, like I said, working on that outdoor pavilion with the bathrooms and things. Hopefully as soon as possible, so that we can have a fall festival there on this year. That's the goal. That's my hope. So, like I said, if you have any questions, just email, text, let us know, and we will address those next Sunday. I hope and pray that we move forward with the blessing of God and by the Spirit of God, and that we would become a congregation that more fully advances the kingdom and proclaims the gospel, because that's what we are here to do. Finally, I got a couple of announcements I want to leave you with. The Galentine's is this Friday night, and so if you are a lady and you want to attend, you can message Heather to sign up for that. Also, there is a Kids' Day Out on Saturday. If you want your kids to come, I think that's in the evening, then message Candida Keziah and sign up for that as well. We will have classes tonight. If anybody's able and wants to come, I'm hoping and thinking the roads will be totally clear by then. So if you're able, join us for class tonight. And if there's anything else, I can't think of what it is. So I am just going to let y'all go. I appreciate y'all, and I look forward to seeing you soon.